OverHERD at Career Education. My name is Denny Doherty, and I have a very special guest with me today, someone that I presume most of you have heard of, our very own president, Dr. Gilbert. Would you like to introduce yourself, Dr. Gilbert?
Hi, I'm Jerry Gilbert, 37th president of Marshall. I've been here for almost 6 years. Had a great experience at Marshall and just have enjoyed every minute of it.
Wonderful, and thank you so much for agreeing to join me today. We were thinking in my department about who would be a really awesome guest, or some awesome guests for this fall, and Dr. Gilbert's name came up, and I reached out to, I believe, Cora and Leah,
right.
And they indicated Dr. Gilbert had interest, and the rest is history. So I'm just really excited to jump into our discussion today, because in addition to just to talking to Dr. Gilbert through the lens of him being the president, we're also going to talk about some career matters and how he got to where he is today. So I'm expecting us to have a pretty interesting conversation. So I'm looking forward to jumping into that. So first thing I wanted to talk to you about, Dr. Gilbert, is that your degrees are in biological and biomedical engineering. Is that right?
Right, they are.
Okay. So when looking at that field, what specifically stood out to you about the field? And also kind of a two-part. So what stood out about the field, and then what did you think your career would look like?
Well, I was in high school in 1973, graduated in 73. Ironically, that's the year that I came to the National Youth Science Camp in West Virginia, and I was thinking about biology and medicine. I'd loved biology throughout junior high school and into high school. My brother was an engineer in college in mechanical engineering, and he was telling me about a new field, biological engineering, that had just begun. I think the first program was 1968, so this was 5 years after that. There were only a few programs in the country. And he described the program at Mississippi State University in biological engineering. It was, I think, the second or third program in the country to be accredited. And I thought, well, it's got the physics that I like, it's got the biology that I like, the math, it's all kind of in one field. And that was very appealing to me, to have a analytical aspect of medicine or biology, because I had enjoyed it so much, and I love physics as well. So I thought it was a great combination. I knew that at that point the field was kind of emerging. There weren't a lot of jobs for biomedical engineers at that point, but I figured it would be a growing field because it was such an exciting combination of different disciplines. So I said, well, I think I'm just going to try that. So I went and majored in that and just loved it.
That's awesome. I really love hearing how you found that out. And one thing that stuck out to me as something it sounds like you did really well, and something that we encourage students to do is just research, because you said it was kind of an emerging field, not as known then as it is now. But it sounds like you still did some fact finding and looked into it a little bit and thought about how it combines your strengths and things you were interested in.
Well, and also I knew that as a freshman I could change the majors if I didn't like it, but it did seem like it was a great match for me. And you ask what I thought I might do with that. I really wasn't sure, but my goal sort of was to find a job working in a device industry, making devices. Back then, artificial hearts were big, and everyone was talking about artificial hearts. They were also talking about artificial eyes, which we still don't have one. They were talking about it then. We're still talking about it. And other artificial organs. So it was really an artificial organ-based discussion around that field back in that time. Some little things on the fringe, but that was what was the most exciting part. There was a TV show back then, The $6 Million Man. I mean, it was just those sorts of, NASA was big. I mean, all of that sort of fed into the idea, we can use technology to make people better. So it was very exciting to me.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And I think it's something where, because I know you mentioned about the eyes, how it was talked about then, and still, I presume in development, hopefully one day we actually can have something like that.
The biggest problem with the artificial eye was the interface between the electrode and the nerve, and we're still wrestling with that today, but that's been one of the biggest, that and trying to tap into the right parts of the optic nerve in order to get a signal to the brain that would then reproduce something that would look like a visual field. They've got crude numbers and shapes and things, but nothing that looks like the normal eye vision has been successfully transmitted through the nervous system into the brain.
Oh, wow. So it's an area for continued exploration.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Because I mean, I feel like talking about, I hate to say it like this, body parts, there's something we're always going to need, and ways to replicate that, and just what that could do for blindness,
exactly,
vision problems would be really interesting. I don't know if now the hearts I'd heard of, but I'd never really heard of the eye. So that's pretty remarkable.
Well, not a lot of people are working on it. I have a friend that worked on it in graduate school. He's still working in the eye area, but it's not a lot of people working. The demand for that is not near as high demand as for a heart or auditory, supplement of your hearing. So, but there are people working on the eye.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. So with you having an interest in science and medicine, and also I know you'd mentioned physics and how all those things pulled together. And I know reading over your biography, you had taught, you'd served as a professor for a while.
I did.
So at what point did you decide to start to look into being a college administrator?
Well, I never really thought about being a college administrator. It sort of just happened. The story was I was at Mississippi State. I was very busy in research, had a NIH grant looking at osteoporosis. I guess I was about into my 7th or 8th year as a professor there, or as an associate professor, and then as a professor. And I was very much into my research, and our department chair stepped down, and they were going to put an interim in. So they had selected another person in the department who was a great friend of mine, and I was supportive of him, and we thought he was going to be the interim department head. So I was down actually in the College of Veterinary Medicine with my osteoporosis project doing some research, and I got a call from the dean of the college and said, I need for you to come up to my office. And I said, well, I'm busy right now. I said, I've got this project going. He said, no, I need for you to come up right away. This is very important. And I said, well, okay. I didn't know what it was. And I got in there and he said, well, your friend is no longer able to be the interim department chair, so I want to appoint you the interim department chair. And I said, well, why would you want to do that? And he said, I think you would be good. And I said, you do? And he said, yes. And I went, well, let me think about it. So I thought about it, and I went in reluctantly. But after about 6 months, I discovered that it was an area where you could make a big impact, and I sort of enjoyed the interface with people and the management aspect of an administrative position. So I applied for the full position, or the permanent position, and was selected, but that was sort of how I just stumbled into it.
Oh, wow. So it found you more than you found it, really.
Exactly.
Like. So
exactly.
That's incredible, and that's something else that we also talk to students about, is being open to opportunities, even if they are a little bit outside of what they thought they might do. Because it sounds like your original career goals were research and medicine, and
exactly, and teaching. I love teaching, and I thought, I continued doing teaching and research while I was department head, and then I went on to be in the provost office, at which point I gave up all of my research at that point. That was about 6 years later, I guess, or 8 years later. Gave up my research. Actually was quite active in research as a department head, but then when I became provost, I did a little teaching, but I gave up most of my research.
Okay. Was that, if you don't mind me asking, was that kind of a hard thing to do, to get out of research, or was it just time for a change?
It wasn't. It was not that difficult. I was a good researcher. I was not Nobel laureate quality, but I was a pretty good researcher. I probably wasn't the best one in the university. I enjoyed teaching. I was a good teacher. Again, I wasn't the best teacher. But I continue to teach a little bit, and I do enjoy my interaction with students, so I've tried to keep up that interaction, even if I don't teach in the classroom, just an ability to interact with students.
That's great, and I personally can attest to that because I know obviously not this past year, but the previous couple years of teaching Uni 100, I know coming to the classes and shaking hands individually and making a connection with every student. I really enjoyed personally watching that, and I know that meant the world to the students because they were like, "Wow, seriously, the president's coming here."
Right.
I think visiting, and then the president shook my hand and asked my name. They were, I mean,
Yeah.
they didn't know what to think of that. They were kind of blown away by that.
Well, I enjoy doing that. I don't think I'm going to be able to shake hands this year, but I am going to go to some of the classes. I don't know if I'll make it to all of them, but I am going to go to some uni classes this year.
That's wonderful. I think it's a way to get out of the office a little bit and
Right.
that student just be seen, that student interaction. 'Cause my students they about flipped over that last time. They thought it was the coolest thing they'd ever seen. So talking about maybe a few people who have positively impacted your career. Can you talk to us about that a little bit? Maybe just a few people who have made an impact on your career.
Well, certainly the high school teacher who recommended me to the National Youth Science Camp recommended that I apply and brought me to West Virginia. That was Mrs. Alexander. I don't know what her first name was. We just called her Mrs. Alexander, but she was my chemistry teacher in high school. She certainly, by virtue of that, had an impact on me. The dean that called me to ask me to be department chair was a guy named Bill Fox, who's still around, and he was actually a speaker at my investiture, and he is quite the character. He's from East Tennessee. He is very much the yarn or storyteller, and but a great administrator and a great individual that can recognize talent. And that's what he taught me, was that you have to look for talent in other people and identify them, and then give them opportunities. And he gave me that opportunity to be interim department chair, which was, kind of changed my whole trajectory. So I credit him with that. He also, in my senior year of college, he was my professor when I was a student, and then when I came back, he was still at Mississippi State, and he asked me to be the chair. So he's, that was 12 or 13 years later, but longer than that, probably 15 years later. But anyway, when I was an undergraduate, as a junior, he asked me to come and participate in a research project in the summer of my junior year, which I did, which sort of put me on the path to go to graduate school, because prior to that, I was thinking more I was just going to go out and get a job and not go to graduate school. So he transformed me that way, first as a student that would think about going to graduate school, and then as a professor about going into administration. So he had a big impact on my career. And the other person that I'll name is the current president of Mississippi State, Mark Keenum, who selected me to be his provost, and worked very closely with him and learned a tremendous amount about administration and about being a president by being around him and observing him and interacting with him. And he is probably one of the finest presidents I've ever seen. And I learned a lot just by observing him and being with him and seeing how he conducted business. And, I have great admiration for him. And the last person that I will mention, because I always like to mention her, is my ninth grade English teacher, who prior to that we were in segregated schools, and she was my black English teacher for the second half of my ninth grade year. And she really taught me about respecting other people. She and I developed a bond, sort of just by accident, and really ended up having a big impact on how I view people, and sort of transformed my whole way of looking at the world. So Mrs. Beatrice Moore had a tremendous impact on my whole life, not just my career, but my whole life. So I always like to mention her.
That's wonderful, and it sounds like you've had a lot of just great people come through your life throughout your whole story, and at different points, which is really great to hear. And I also like when you talked about the internship too, because again, I do like to bring up things that we encourage students to do, and again, just taking advantage of those opportunities, because some students are very proactive about that. Sometimes we have to sell that to other students. No, you really do need to do this. So anytime we can hear kind of like a success story of
Right.
that, I think it's a really great thing, and that's just yet another one I think that's wonderful.
Well, it wasn't quite as common back in the 70s as it is now to have an internship or to have a summer research opportunity, but I think they're extremely important. All of those out-of-class experiences, whether it's being an officer in a club or a group on campus, all of those things help you develop as a person and as a individual and give you additional skills that will help you in your career in many different ways that you don't even think about now or wouldn't even imagine later. So all of those real world experiences are extremely valuable, just as valuable as the disciplinary knowledge that you learn in the classroom.
For sure, absolutely. So, can you tell us about a challenge that you faced as the president of Marshall and how you tackled that challenge?
Well, I saw a number of different opportunities, and I'll call it a challenge, but I also thought it was an opportunity. When I was looking at Marshall as a university and considering applying to be president, and I was called up by the search firm and asked to consider it, I did a lot of research and looked at a lot of the data on Marshall. And something that struck me as very interesting was that we had a very low student success rate. That is a very low graduation rate, 6-year graduation rate, and a low retention rate. And I think when I came, the retention rate was about 73%, so that meant that 73% of the freshmen ended up as sophomores that were first-time freshmen. So I thought that was something we could improve on. And then 49% of our students graduated in 6 years, and I thought that was very, very low, and that we could definitely improve on that. So I looked at those two data points as challenges and tried to come up with, and I think I've come up with a very successful way to increase those numbers. We have put in place a program called the Friend at Marshall program, which pairs upper level students with freshmen. We're expanding that to the sophomore year now.
Oh, great.
There are about 18 upper level students that are mentors to the freshmen. They have pods of about 100 students in the pod, and throughout the semester and both semesters of freshman year, they communicate on a weekly, if not a daily basis with those 100 students, just making sure that they're not having problems, giving them a sense of belonging, and helping them out whenever they can. And we've seen that has, I think it increased the retention rate about 5% in 1 year, and our graduation rate has now gone over 50% for the first time in the history of the university. So it's been quite successful. I sort of outlined what it was going to be, and then Sherry Smith and Katarina Sray in Academic Affairs sort of took over and really fleshed out that program, which is a very, very important part of Marshall's plan for student success.
Absolutely, and I can speak firsthand again to the just how great of a program that is, because on behalf of my office, a few different years now, I've gone in, I've done some training for the FAM, the peer mentors, talking largely about what my office does. But I'm thinking maybe once or twice I covered a few other things with them, and I know they pull high quality students in who are passionate about student success and really want to see their peers do well. And I just think it's a tremendous program. I've seen it firsthand. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's really cool too, just thinking about looking at those metrics and how can we improve them, because I did a little bit with accreditation before I came to Marshall, and those things like retention. I mean, those are key metrics for a college, and those are very important. And if your numbers aren't good on that, you're hurting. So I think identifying those goals and then finding realistic ways to attain them, that's really neat. That's really neat. So how did you go about adjusting to the Huntington area and making it feel more like home after living in Mississippi for so long?
It wasn't as big of an adjustment as a lot of people might think that it was. The thing that I found that was very similar is that the people of at least southern West Virginia are very similar to the people in Mississippi. They're kind of salt of the earth, down to earth people, and I was used to being around that type people in Mississippi, and it was easy to see that that was characteristic of the people in Huntington in this region. So it wasn't difficult adjusting to the people. Terrain was very different. It's Mississippi is extremely flat. I was home this past March, I guess it was, or February, and then again in June, and it was so flat there. I had forgotten how flat it was in Mississippi, and then when you come up here, it's like, my gosh, there's not much flat space anywhere. So the geography was a big adjustment. But I had been to West Virginia in 1973, as I mentioned earlier, so I knew how beautiful the state was. I loved the mountains. I loved the natural beauty of West Virginia. So I felt very much at home. I felt like I was kind of coming back home.
Oh, that's great.
Because I felt a very close attachment to the state in 1973. Even though I was just here for a month, I felt very bound to the state in a lot of emotional ways.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm happy it was a fairly easy transition, and it sounds like it's been, in your time here, it's been an excellent experience.
It has
I'm
been.
very happy to hear that as well. So, what are a few pieces of advice, just of any sort, that you would have for students of Marshall?
I would advise any students this, and I'd advise it to ones at Marshall as well, is to keep your eyes open for opportunities, because many times I've seen people not respond to opportunities that could have led them down many different positive paths, and there are many opportunities that are out there. I probably had the reverse issue in that I said yes to too many things, but I do see a lot of people say no to things, and I think that really limits their opportunities in the future. So I would say, be open to new ideas, open to opportunities that might not be exactly what you're thinking about in terms of what you may want to do with your life, because, life has a way of presenting things to you and then kind of blossoming out from there, and you don't really know where it's going to take you. So be open to opportunities. I'd also tell them never to be too discouraged by failure or anything that might not go their way, because there's always going to be another opportunity. And that if you do mess up, just learn from those mistakes. Try not to make them again. Be willing to say you're sorry when you know that you've messed up and you've done something wrong that has offended someone. Be honest. And, I think developing those relationships by genuine interactions with people will put you in a good position to be successful.
I think very well said. So the last thing I just want to ask you about here is unfortunately, we know your tenure as president is going to be over next year, and it's no secret, and there's of course a search going on for whoever will be the next president. So what about you? Have you started to think about what your post-Marshall plans might be?
I have. My wife and I have been thinking about going to Richmond, Virginia, which some of her family lives there. I want to continue to be active in higher education. I don't want to seek a full-time president's job, a permanent job, but I would be open to some opportunities where I could serve either part-time or in some capacity with consulting, or be involved in higher education from that standpoint, particularly at the administrative level. Also looking at nonprofits to be involved in some volunteer work, and that sort of thing. So
that's wonderful. I think they all sound like excellent causes. And of course I'm a ways off from retirement, but I've thought that myself too. Whenever I get there, I can't. Once you get into education, I think it gets into your blood, and I don't know how you just totally stop that. And I think if nothing else, either volunteering or adjunct teaching or something, I'd probably till the day I die or the day I'm just not capable of doing it anymore, I plan to do that.
Absolutely, it's good to be around students. I've always enjoyed that, and that's what I'll miss the most about not being in a full-time academic job. I've been at a university setting since 1973. I have not been outside of the university setting for any period of time since I first went to college. So you could say I never left college.
I like that.
And I've enjoyed it, every minute of it.
And it sounds like you've impacted countless lives, and you've taken advantage of some great opportunities, and just had an amazing career. So it's really been a privilege to just to talk to you today and just hear about your story and just hear how you got to administration, how you got to Marshall, and just what the future holds for you.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I will say that I love the Marshall students. They are close to my heart. I will miss them when I'm gone, but I'm very impressed with the average Marshall student. I think they are as competitive as anybody in this country, and they need to remember that, because they can do anything they want to do after they've got their degree at Marshall.
I wholeheartedly agree with every word you said. That's wonderful. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to again thank you, Dr. Gilbert, for, as I know, President, I know you're a busy man, but just for clearing up some time to speak with us today. That really means a lot to me and my department. I'm happy that you were able to join us.
My pleasure.
And again, I want to thank all of our listeners, and I hope you join us back here next time.